Good morning. It is still morning. It's still morning. Good morning, and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. It's been a long week. Been a very long week. So what I'm here to discuss today is that 90s show, the first half of it. Because I didn't finish the show. I got through the first 5 episodes out of 10. And really what I wanted to talk about this more in the context of, after watching these first 5 episodes, is just how much the world of sitcoms has changed between that 70s show and now. Because I think that even though that 90s show is an established IP, and that it is a direct sequel to that 70s show, it is the next, it's a sequel, because it opens up with, the fuck are their names? Laura Prepon and, Eric and, not Jackie, Eric and, what the fuck's the other girl's name? I don't remember her name. Either way, it opens up with their kid, and they are, they have this little girl, or teenage girl named Leia, and she is she goes to Point Place for the 4th of July weekend, and she ends up making friends there, and she ends up staying there for a little bit. She talks her parents into staying. And I think that the first episode does a great job of, introducing everyone, introducing why she's going to be staying there, and using kind of, that feels more like an episode of that 70s show than anything that comes after it, because you have Laura Prepon and you have, Topher Grace, in their roles, and they're back, and they're back in the characters, and it gives you this chance to reestablish who everyone is, learn the new dynamic of these new characters, while having the crutch of, here's some old characters that you probably remember. And that's an important part of it, because it's if you're gonna do a spin-off, that's probably the best way to do it. There are notable exceptions. I think that, Frasier doesn't open with him leaving Cheers and going back to Seattle, because you don't need that necessarily. The same, this, I don't think would have worked without that first episode to kind of establish who everyone is. And also, that 70s show is a little foggy, considering I haven't watched it since high school. My sister was on a major that 70s show kick when I was in high school. So it's been about a good 15 years, because I distinctly remember playing Mercenaries 2 while she was watching that. And that came out 15 years ago this year. But I'm looking at, I seem to recall Fez ending up with Jackie, and they do address that, because they do address why Fez and Jackie aren't together, because she gets back together with Kelso, and I'm alright, that's cool, I guess. And Fez is there for an episode, or he's there for 2 episodes, because he's there at the very end of one, and then he's there in the next episode is the B plot. I think that's an interesting kind of approach to using these main characters in the original, because Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis only come back for 1 episode, and it's a very short bit, because they introduce Kelso's son, and I could have swore he had a daughter on the original That 70s show. It could just be that they're just ignoring it, because that's the thing too, it's so many of these sitcoms play fast and loose with the continuity, that I saw an article on Cracked, people are upset because that 90s show is anachronistic, and I'm the original That 70s show was anachronistic. That's the thing, is it's meant in the same way that Goldberg's is kind of it's kind of like that 70s show before the 80s, because it takes an amalgam of everything 80s that you remember and puts it in one show, but not in a way where it's it's not meant to be sequential. It's meant to be, hey, remember this 80s thing? Hey, remember this 80s thing? Hey, remember this 80s thing? Hey, here's an episode where they go to see Batman 89. Oh, here's an episode about this. Oh, here's an episode about, oh, now he's going to college. Okay, so we're now out of the 80s, because, Adam Goldberg went to college in the 90s, but we're still gonna stick with the 80s, and it's kind of like, you know, it's that kind of thing, where it doesn't really matter what order you do it in. It's just kind of you do what you want. Like, I think the most egregious one was setting the date and then having like having her sing "You Ought to Know," which didn't come out for a few days after. Like, I think that's the most egregious, only because it's like, what's it called? It's only because it's, you know, it's you're setting a concrete date at that point. By saying it's 1995 and 4th of July weekend, and then immediately doing that, you do kind of run that risk of being like, okay, we have to, you know, we're going to show the, what's wrong if we're here? We're going to, you know, we're going to inherently set a date, and then if we don't quite handle the date properly, it's not going to matter. But yeah, I think that the whole, you know, the whole issue at hand with it, I don't have a problem with the anachronism, because it's designed to be that way, and it does what it's designed to do. Like, in the same way that, like, okay, it's 95, and they're like, what's the movie about those guys in that place, and it's like 95, and it's like, oh, it's Clerks, and it's like, if it's 95, it'd probably be Mallrats. It's like if you're going for a smaller movie that people wouldn't like. I think that, like, I saw a tweet that kind of summed it up perfectly, where it's like it's designed for people who were born in 1999, where it's like they have approximate knowledge of things that happened in the decade before they were born, but not a super deep understanding of the sequence of it. And that's not to say that I do too, because 95 I would have been like an infant, because I would have been like a year old, but still, like, you know, looking back now, you know, you can look at it and see, but at the same time, it's not a bad show for that, I don't think. It's like, it's just like, it does what the plot needs it to, which is all you really expect it to ever do, if that makes sense. Like, you're not there to, you know, to get a deep and kind of anthropological look at life in the 90s. It's a sitcom set in the 90s, using an exaggerated version of it as the, what's it called, as the backdrop. And I think that that's kind of what it is. And they'll interact with it off and on, but that's not the most important part of it. What else was there? There's also the important, and the other thing is, like, thinking back to the original, like, that 70s show in the 90s, like, I don't think that it was particularly a, what's the word for here? Like, I'm not saying it was, it didn't have a stacked roster, to say the least. Like, I don't think that when you look back at that 70s show, you look back at it fondly, like, this show had a huge cast. The cast became huge after the fact. Don't get me wrong. Like, actors went from there to do big things. But they didn't exactly come from there. They didn't come into it with a deep bench of acting credits. Like, I think, like, you know, Ashton Kutcher had he been in a few movies before that, or was that his first time? I don't remember off the top of my head. Or, like, Mila Kunis was in Honey, We Shrunk Ourselves. Yeah, keep that in mind next time you watch that movie, if you ever do again. Who else was there? There was, like, Topher Grace hadn't been in anything major. Like, Deborah Jo Rupp was a character actress from television. I think Kurtwood Smith probably had the deepest acting background. And again, if I'm wrong, someone correct me, but I think that Kurtwood Smith had the deepest acting, you know, filmography at that point. You know, he was in RoboCop, he was in plenty of movies before that. And I think that going out on a limb for that is not something we really see anymore. Especially considering how much of that show was centered on the kids, who are not exactly the most marketable in season 1. And I'm watching the show, and I'm like, this show's pretty funny. Why didn't a network pick this up to air as part of their primetime lineup? Because, like, I'm watching, like, fucking Lopez vs. Lopez. Like, me and my dad are watching that, and I'm like, that's not great. And this show is definitely funnier than the Night Court reboot. like, it's definitely funny that it like, by leaps and bounds, it's funnier than the Night Court reboot. Maybe it's just that I sat through 5 episodes straight instead of sitting through 2 episodes of Night Court. That's not to say Night Court's bad. Night Court's pretty funny too. But, like, this show is not bad, but I think the issue comes in with the first episode isn't a strong enough sell on the kids who are going to be driving the plot going into episode 2. And I think that they still rely too much on having the kids be dependent on Kitty and Red. Which I think is a problem. I think that that's part of the problem with the show, is that they're too dependent on Kitty and Red for a good amount of the show. Now, the issue with that is, I don't think that necessarily, what's all over here? I lost my train of thought. I think that that's entirely why the show didn't end up on network, is that you can't market a long run based on that. And I think that, like, what needed to happen is that when you go back and watch that 70s show, Kitty and Red had their own plot line, usually with Bob, who is what's her name? I for whatever reason I'm blanking on Laura Prepon's character's name over and over again. And that's the only character whose name is kind of in a blind spot, and I'm not entirely sure why. Like, that is, you know, like, they had their own subplot, and then you had the A plot, which was whatever shenanigans the kids were getting into. Sometimes that would get divided up into 2 separate plot lines, and then they would occasionally intersect with each other. I think that for this, we are holding them too close together. I think the from what I've seen so far, up to episode 5, the episode with the chair is the only one really where the plot with them is not inherently tied in some way to the plot with the kids. And I'm like, I don't think that's necessarily the best way to handle it. I think that they need to have their own thing. And I think that when you look at it that way, it's kind of like, well, why is this, why do they need to be bound together this way? Again, show's not bad. I'm not saying the show is bad. I'm not saying the show is even not good. The show is very, very well made. I'm just saying that it is a perfect kind of encapsulation of how this happened. Because when you look at this cast and what this is, I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, this is a Nickelodeon show. Oh, this is a Disney Channel show. Oh, this is, when Cartoon Network had that brief stint in the 2000s where it was doing, where it was doing, not kids programming, but like live action kids programming on Cartoon Network in the late 2000s. Like, this fits there. This is a Disney Plus show or something like that because of how young the cast is and how unknown the cast is. And that's not a knock on them, because I think they're doing great. Like, the girl who plays Leia is perfectly cast as someone who has all the neurotic tendencies of Eric. Like, she does such a great job of capturing all of that it's like, okay, why is it, like, you see her and you're like, oh, that's definitely Eric's daughter. And I think that's pitch perfect casting. The other cast are all great too. I think they all do a great job of in their own roles and filling out this cast. I think there's a lot of teasing of same-sex relationships that I would assume doesn't go anywhere. Because we have the one kid who is gay, and he's got the boyfriend Etienne who lives in Canada, that no one believes is real, and which I'm like, oh, that's weird. It's like, but it's like, oh no, they're in Wisconsin, which borders Canada. That's fine. And like with that, I'm looking at it and I'm like, all right, that's a little bit of a all right, that's cool. And then they, like, I think that they definitely are indicating that the two other girls definitely, at minimum, I get the vibe from the friend who was singing earlier, whose name I'm forgetting too. The friend who was singing in the first episode. I get the vibe from her that she is into other girls. I get that vibe from her. And I think it's the 5th episode where the two where her and the other girl are forced to hang out. That's not the only one whose name I remember is Leia, because they say her name constantly. The one who has the boyfriend. You get the vibe that they like hooked up. Like, that's definitely what they're indicating, but it's never explicitly stated. It's a kind of a weird situation, I guess, but you kind of get that vibe when you're watching the show, that they're indicating that, and I would not be surprised if by the end of the season they don't do anything explicitly toward that end and maybe save that for a season 2. But the show's not terrible. It's really not. It's a pretty strong Netflix take on a sitcom. I think the sitcom is better served by the weekly episodic model than it is the dump model, because it gives you more time to sit with it and really like get to know what you've watched in a way. And I think dumping out that many episodes of a comedy doesn't benefit the same way that if you had dumped out that many episodes of a drama, where it's like there's a reason to sit down and get through the next episode. And I think the other thing is too, when you do the dump model, you do kind of send the message to the creators that they should try to do something somewhat serialized. Like, you can watch these episodes basically in any order, and you can watch them out of order, and they all have their great comedic moments and all of that kind of stuff. But that said, like, I feel like the show is definitely designed to have this overarching story, because you have the will they won't they of Jay Kelso and Leia. Like, that's the big thing that happens. It's like, oh, are they going to get together? Are they not going to get together? And it's just the summer, so what then? And I think that's also part of the problem, is that this is designed to be a summer show, where not in terms of when it comes out or when it takes. It's when it takes. It's Leia spending her summer with her grandparents, but if that's the case, it does kind of put a weird spin on the relationship aspect, because then the problem becomes is this is all going to inevitably come to an end unless we're setting up a season 2, which will, like, I think that inherently they can't quite get together because it's just going to end by the end of the show, and they'll both go their separate ways, and then maybe they'll come back next summer, or maybe she'll come back next summer, but who knows. And I really like the way that Red's characterized this in this show. I really like his, like the playing more into the direct, like, he's showing his love in his way, and that's great. It's like that. Like, the moment he says, "I've never been prouder of you" to Eric, when he tries to stick his foot up her ass, it's like that made me laugh out loud. It's such a great comedic beat. But yeah, so we'll do another episode about the second half of the season after I watch that, which will probably be tonight after I watch The Last of Us. But until then, have a great rest of your week.